Wyatt was a champion rodeo star until a single bullet left him paralyzed from the waist down. Doctors said he'd never stand again. But they didn't count on Barnaby, a stubborn, crusty old donkey who refused to let Wyatt give up. This isn't just a recovery story, it's a miracle on 4 hooves. Wyatt Miller was a man built of iron and leather. In the world of the professional rodeo, his name was spoken with respect. He had spent his life taming 2,000-pound bulls and riding horses that moved like lightning. He was fast, he was strong, and he was fearless. But the thing that changed his life forever did not happen in a dirt arena under bright lights. It happened on a quiet Tuesday night at a gas station on the edge of town. A man with a masked face and a shaky hand pointed a gun at the clerk. Wyatt, being the man he was, did not think twice. He stepped forward to help. There was a loud bang that echoed against the cold glass windows. Wyatt felt a strange heat in his back, and then he felt nothing at all. He hit the floor before he even heard the sound of the getaway car. When he woke up in the hospital, the world was too white and too quiet. A doctor stood by his bed with a look of deep sadness. He told Wyatt that the bullet had damaged his spine. The words were simple, but they felt like a death sentence. The doctor said that Wyatt would never walk again. He said the nerves were dead and the legs that had once gripped the sides of charging broncos were now useless. 4 months, Wyatt lived in a dark room at his family ranch. He looked out the window at the empty saddles and the dusty boots he could no longer wear. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. The man who could conquer any beast was now trapped in a metal chair. He had lost his career, his strength, and his hope. He did not know it yet, but his journey back to the light would not start with a doctor. It would start with a creature that was just as stubborn as he was. The silence of the ranch was broken one Tuesday morning by the loud, rhythmic braying of an animal that sounded like a rusty gate swinging in the wind. Wyatt sat in his wheelchair on the porch, his face set in a permanent scowl. A stock trailer pulled up, and his neighbor's son stepped out, looking nervous. "My father wanted you to have him, Wyatt," the young man said, gesturing to the animal inside. "He said if anyone could handle Barnaby, it was a rodeo legend like you." When the ramp dropped, a small, dusty gray donkey stepped out. He was not majestic. He had long, floppy ears, a potbelly, and a coat that looked like it had been through a briar patch. Barnaby had a permanent limp in his back leg and a gaze that was cold and judging. He didn't look like a gift, he looked like a burden. "I can't even take care of myself," Wyatt snapped, his voice gravelly from weeks of disuse. "What am I supposed to do with a half-dead donkey?" But the neighbor was already driving away, leaving the lead rope tied to a fence post. Wyatt stared at the donkey, and the donkey stared back. Barnaby didn't blink. He didn't look at the wheelchair with pity like the people in town did. Instead, the donkey let out a loud, mocking snort and began to chew on the wooden fence. For the first few days, Wyatt ignored him. He watched from the window as Barnaby stood in the dirt, stubborn and unmoving. But the donkey had a strange habit. Every time Wyatt rolled his chair out to the porch for a breath of air, Barnaby would walk to the edge of the porch and wait. He wouldn't beg for food or attention. He simply stood there, a gray shadow of a life that refused to be forgotten. The silence between the man and the donkey lasted for weeks. Wyatt spent his days staring at the horizon, his legs resting like heavy stones on the footrests of his chair. Barnaby spent his days standing just a few feet away, his long ears twitching at every passing breeze. The donkey did not act like a pet. He acted like a mirror, reflecting Wyatt's own stubborn refusal to give up. One afternoon, the wind picked up and knocked Wyatt's favorite leather hat off the porch railing. It tumbled into the dirt, landing just out of reach. Wyatt groaned, his fingers gripping the wheels of his chair. He leaned forward, straining his back, but his fingertips were inches away from the brim. He felt a familiar wave of anger and shame. A simple hat was now a mountain he could not climb. Barnaby trotted over slowly. The donkey looked at the hat, then looked at Wyatt. With a sudden movement, Barnaby picked up the hat in his teeth. Wyatt reached out his hand, expecting the animal to drop it. Instead, Barnaby took 2 steps back. "Give it here, you gray pest," Wyatt growled. Barnaby shook his head and took another step back. He stood near a sturdy wooden post, holding the hat just high enough that Wyatt would have to lift his entire upper body out of the chair to grab it. The donkey's eyes were steady and challenging. He was not playing a game, he was setting a trap. Wyatt grunted as he pushed himself upward, using his arms to lift his weight. His muscles burned. His breath came in ragged gasps. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about his injury. He was thinking about beating that stubborn donkey. Barnaby stood as still as a statue, providing a solid shadow for Wyatt to lean toward, forcing the cowboy to find a balance he thought he had lost forever. What started as a battle of wills turned into a grueling daily routine. Wyatt realized that Barnaby was not like his high-strung horses. The donkey was a solid, living anchor. Each morning, Wyatt rolled his chair into the dirt of the corral. He began to use Barnaby's sturdy back to pull himself upward. The donkey would not move a muscle, standing as firm as a rock while Wyatt's arms shook with the effort of supporting his own weight. Barnaby seemed to understand exactly how much help Wyatt needed. If Wyatt began to lean too far to one side, the donkey would subtly shift his weight to nudge him back into balance. There were no soft words or gentle encouragement, only the smell of dusty fur and the steady heartbeat of an animal that refused to let Wyatt fall. The pain in Wyatt's core was intense, but it was a good pain, the kind he remembered from his days in the arena. Slowly, the connection between his mind and his muscles began to flicker back to life. He wasn't just sitting anymore. He was working. He was a cowboy again, and his new trainer was a four-legged therapist who took his payment in carrots and silence. The rumors began to drift through the valley like smoke. People at the local diner whispered about the broken cowboy and his crazy donkey. Silas, the same rancher who had mocked Clara's horse, drove his truck past Wyatt's fence one afternoon and slowed to a crawl. He didn't see a man sitting in a dark room. He saw Wyatt out in the middle of the dirt corral, his hands buried deep in the thick gray fur of Barnaby's neck. Wyatt was not sitting. He was upright, his legs trembling like leaves in a storm, but he was vertical. The townspeople began to stop their trucks along the road, watching in a silence that was thick with awe. They saw the donkey move with a slow, mechanical precision, taking one tiny step and then waiting for Wyatt to adjust his footing. There was no laughter now. The skeptics who had once called Barnaby a useless eater saw the truth. The animal was acting as a living walker, a four-legged bridge between paralysis and a new life. Doc Higgins, the vet, pulled over and tipped his hat, his eyes misty. He realized that no medicine in his bag could have done what that stubborn, dusty donkey was doing for the man who had lost everything. The air on the ranch was crisp on the morning the miracle finally happened. 4 months, Wyatt had practiced the same grueling movement, gripping Barnaby's sturdy neck, bracing his core, and trying to find a spark of life in his leaden legs. The townspeople parked their trucks along the fence line, watching in a silence so deep you could hear the grass rustling in the wind. They weren't there to mock anymore. They were there to witness a fight. Barnaby stood as still as a mountain. Wyatt's face was slick with sweat, his jaw locked in a grimace of pure concentration. He felt a strange, electric tingle, a sensation he hadn't felt since the night of the shooting. It wasn't pain, it was a signal. With a low, guttural growl of effort, Wyatt shifted his weight away from the donkey's back. For a second, he wobbled. The crowd held its breath. Then, it happened. Wyatt lifted his right boot and placed it 6 inches forward in the dust. It was a small, shaky, ugly step, but it was a step. Barnaby didn't move to catch him. The donkey simply waited, his ears forward, as if saying, "Do it again." Wyatt took a second step, then a third, his hand barely skimming Barnaby's fur for balance. Tears streamed down the faces of the hardened ranchers watching from the road. The cowboy who was broken was walking his ranch again. Years later, the wheelchair sat in the back of the barn, covered in cobwebs and dust. Wyatt never returned to the rodeo, but he became a legend for a different reason. He and Barnaby started a small program on the ranch, helping other injured veterans and fallen riders find their footing. When Barnaby finally passed away of old age, Wyatt buried him on the highest hill of the property, overlooking the trails they had walked together. He didn't put a fancy headstone on the grave. Instead, he placed a simple bronze statue of a donkey and a pair of cowboy boots. The legacy was clear. Sometimes, the best medicine doesn't come in a bottle. It comes with long ears, a stubborn heart, and a friend who refuses to let you stay down.